So we have some time. Or we have about 5 minutes. That clock's a bit behind. We have a few minutes for questions, and I wonder if you have questions that you might pose to all of the panellists. That would be the place to start. Yeah, go ahead.
So a common topic that was sort of brought up, or at least hinted in most of the speakers' discussions, was the idea of public perception being an issue in the way that government deals with this and all of that. So I just want to know, how do you change that public perception in order for governments to actually ensure public housing and things like that?
I'm wondering whether we might take a few questions and then give an opportunity out there for some voice.
Great idea. So one question about public perception. Can we take a couple more first and then we'll have some answers?
To talk about luck, you were referring to a little bit about misfortune, and there was some contradictions from one of the other persons saying that it wasn't luck.
Right.
I think we should explore that a little bit more.
Right. How do we combat public perception? Is it luck or not? And then there was one okay, there are two more questions. You sir in the back and then you in front.
Well, I was interested in a related point, which is the terror of being terrified about that this could happen to us, but also then that maybe the move then is to do anything you can to stop you and your family experiencing this, and that's throwing up the shutters. So I thought that was sort of two contradictory arguments between it.
Okay, and then one more question in the back.
Might be related to the first question about public perceptions. Hasn't there been a move over the last 20 or 30 years towards individualising responsibility for whatever problem people have? Judy Brett and Anthony Moran did a fantastic study at La Trobe where they recursively looked at a whole lot, 100 ordinary Australians, and their big conclusion was increasingly people frame the problems of collectivities in terms of personal responsibility.
Where do you want to start?
Can I just quickly, I think we should never ever underestimate how adept this thing that we really can't see, but this system, how adept it is at framing what the problem is, and then almost providing the answers for people that are having the lived experience. Because academia, I don't want to offend anyone. I don't want to offend anyone, but I think but it's important that we recognise that universities, the civil society that Rousseau, this civil society that we're talking, it's been created. It's a construct, and someone's talking about English law, and sort of what. This is my attempt to answer that question, but I think it's an elusive answer because the individualisation of the homeless experience. Like, for example, my boss at work was telling me it's going to be fantastic that homeless people are going to be able to access homelessness packages. So they'll get a lump of money at the beginning of the year, and so they'll have all the freedoms, in the individual freedoms in the world, and then they'll be able to access the services that they need. And so all this thing about freedom of choice and personal responsibility, it sounds great, but we don't live in a void. We live in communities, and if we don't support each other, we fall down. We fall down, and the whole economic rationalist idea, and if these people are responding and they're saying, the best, sorry, what was the answer, that people believe that the best way to go about things is individual?
I think individuals are increasingly being blamed for whatever's going on.
And I would say that's prevalent from what is happening in the media, and I would say yes, that the system, for one of a more sophisticated way of putting it, is incredibly adept at blaming the individual for what's happened.
Look, I'd just pick up on that, and it's connected to the perception stuff, but for a whole lot of people, the proposition that was put forward was, free up market and grow your own wealth, worked for a lot of people, but it threw a small percentage of people under the bus. And if you look at the reforms that were made in order to free up the market, one of it included getting rid of, around 1990, changing the Commonwealth State Housing Agreement in the early 90s, where the capital that flowed into the states to build the 3,000 public housing units a year that we used to build disappeared. But it was very effective. A whole lot of people, I'm sure people sitting in this room, got wealthier because of those reforms. But it did throw a small percentage under the bus, and it made us a crueler society. The other thing which goes to luck, one of the obviously things like income housing, your health protects you from becoming homeless. The other thing that provides protection is community, family and friends. So I could develop a mental illness tomorrow and it would take me some time to become homeless if I lost my job and whatever, because I have those networks. That was the co-factor of the individualism that's happened. We've become, in these large cities, very anonymous. Quite a few of the supporting social structures that used to provide that connection have broken down or disappeared. And particularly things that were formed on the collective. So families, things like service clubs, things like churches and parishes, things like trade unions, where people had not just the material things that they provided, but the community networks. That's all disappeared, and it's gone hand in hand with those things. I think there is a shift back. I think what's happening with housing and housing markets is almost textbook Piketty. If you read, I haven't read Piketty, I've read summaries. I'm waiting for Piketty for Dummies to come out so I can read it. There is a short version. But his thesis and what he puts forward is pretty much exactly what's happened with housing in Australia. So I think things are shifting back.
I'm going to go because I got another thing at 8 o'clock and I'm late. So I'm going to say very briefly, this, like many things, we are living unsustainably and we're not caring and we're not holding each other up. And so the only place to go is to look after yourself. And so I agree with your comment, and therefore to your first question there, it's very difficult to change it. It's really difficult to change it. So I'm getting much, much better at knowing that I can't change that. As much as possible, loving the person next to me in whatever situation is within my ability, and when I can't love them because I don't know how to, forgiving myself, and actually, just as much as possible, taking a breath, doing the best I can today with what I've got, and recognizing now that the forces of where we're going, as somebody who's being extraordinarily privileged in their influence, I don't see a way of stopping this now. So I'm going to be hopeful today. I'm going to love as much as I can. I'm going to care, and I know I'm going to fail, and then I'm going to keep loving because that's going to keep me happy. And I'm really sorry, but I'm not going to hear you, and I'm going to go because I'll be late.
Thank you very much.
What to address? I don't know. How do you change perceptions? I don't know. I ask myself that most days, and as I say, sometimes I think we can win the argument with money, and then I think no, we can't. I think we can't win with the argument about money. We have to change people's perceptions. Is it luck or not? I think in some circumstances it is, in some circumstances it isn't. I mean, I think every person experiencing homelessness who I've ever spoken to has had a different story. So I don't think we can ever make generalisations. Every client I represent, every research participant I meet has a completely different experience. And is it luck? Well, sometimes it looks like really bad luck where multiple terrible things have happened to one person. And yeah, where one bad thing has happened but they don't have any social supports, or where they thought they had really good firm social supports, and when that one bad thing happened, actually no one was there to pick them up when they thought they would be. So there's no simple answer to any of that. Yeah, sometimes it looks like bad luck, sometimes it's about illness. there's no one story, and just like there's no one story for those of us who work in the field, my perception of every person that I meet and every client that I see is different to the person sitting next to me, because it's going to be shaped by my perceptions and it's going to be shaped by my past experience. How can it not? You know, yes, I'm more likely to empathise with a mother whose children have been removed, because that would be a terrible thing to happen to me. And I don't make any apology for that. I just try to remember that whenever I meet someone, and just because I don't understand their path, just because I can't relate to them in terms of their lived experience and it doesn't compare well to mine in terms of correlations, that yes, I would show them the greatest respect and love and competence that I possibly can in that situation. I don't know if that addresses what you said, but that's my response.
Can I make a comment in response to that? Thank you. I really feel, you know, as it was mentioned earlier, Spike, you did, in regard to the media's perception of the homeless or the destitute can be turned around. You know, like we're all here aiming to, and I just think it is really negative that the media chooses to use it in a negative way. I think, you know, the government and the council could choose to do otherwise. I think there have been some really good shows on television in regard to the homeless. I don't know whether you were involved in one of them here in Melbourne, but all right. Well, it was really good, and it was really sympathetic, and it was really empathetic, and it interviewed a number of you would have seen it, I'm sure, on the streets here in Melbourne. It was a good, you know, hour program that really gave you some understanding and empathy with these people and what their situation was and why they had become homeless in that sort of situation. So I really believe, I feel positive. I think it can be changed, and it's up to all of us to do something about it. I mean, I speak to the Melbourne City Council, I speak to the police, I speak to the government. It's important for each of us to put forward a view in regard to finding ways to address this situation. Thank you.
Sorry, but I think it's really, for things to change in a really big way, I think we have to not just be careful, we have to be quite bloody ruthless. And sometimes the cops, the city councillors, you know, politicians are the problem, because there's no, why would the Herald Sun want to promote understanding of something if it's going to undermine their profit line? I mean, I know that sounds horrible, their bottom line. They won't do that. They will refuse, you know, they will not do that. So I think change is possible, but we're going to have to have to accept, and as Nick was, you know, sustainability, we're going to have to do away with some things that we have, that securities that we have, and some comforts that we think we need, but maybe we don't. And maybe we need to get to know our neighbours a little bit better and do away with, and the state has, you know, if, you know, the state enforces the status quo, and it's an old school sort of Marxist sort of idea, but, you know, bottom line it does. And so we need to start thinking about whether community needs to be more involved in creating or replicating our society and our community.
Have you spoken to the council or the police in regard to these issues?
No.
Well, you should be, you know, consulted, because obviously you have experience.
Thanks. No.
I wonder if I can wrap up with a bit of a piggyback on Spike's point, which is to remind us that it has not always been so. And change is of course possible, because it turns out to be, if you look far enough back, the only historical constant. So we are approaching, in terms of levels of debt, in terms of levels of inequality, in terms of levels of economic instability, we're approaching a moment that looks not unlike the decade before the Great Depression, which is a horrifying prospect. But what came out of the Great Depression was the welfare state, socialised medicine, public housing. We would not have those things were it not for those periods of instability. In fact, I want to say that if we look back, we can see even the very beginnings of our market economy as 500 years of oppression, but they also prompted us to develop state forms of charity out of the Vagrancy Acts. And in fact, the very right to vote was first proposed by a range of landless diggers who occupied a spot of the wasteland and asserted such in the 1600s, and it took a while, but we have the right to vote now because a few homeless people made the argument then. So it has not always been thus, and the change, I think, is around the corner.
I think David should have the last word because it was his idea to convene this forum, and I think you'll all admit that it sort of started a conversation that is not obviously going to end tonight, and we're not going to find the solutions tonight, but at least we're starting to address, this really deep problem. And the one thing that came across to me from all the speakers was the deep empathy that they felt with the homeless. And I think that deep empathy will be the source of finding a solution, and that notion that but for chance we'll be going down that way. I would like you to join me in thanking Bill, David for convening the panel, and our panellists, Nick, who unfortunately is gone, Tony, Spike and Tamara. So thank them all very much. I would also just like to thank Sandra Kingston, who's with us, who has convened the first 4 ADI policy forums expertly in terms of providing the administrative backup and the media coverage and the publicity for the ADI policy forum. Sandra won't be doing that next year, but I personally, as the convener, would like to thank her for all the support that she gave me over the last year or so. So thank you very much, Sandra. I'd also, of course, like to thank others at the Alfred Deakin Institute who make this possible. I would like to note that in the past, as part of this policy forum, we've given gifts to the speakers, but from now we've decided to stop giving gifts, but instead ask speakers which charities they'd like to make a donation to. And we've already got contributions going to Launch Housing and the Young People's Legal Rights Centre, and possibly 1 or 2 others when speakers nominate which charity they'd like to make a contribution to. And finally, just to end on a real up note, with Christmas around the corner, I just want to let you know that the cakes that we have left over are all available for people to take home. They've been wrapped up, so please help yourself to some cakes when you leave. But please again join me in thanking the speakers for their wonderful contributions. Hope you all have a good break.